The Timberwolves have been the best defense in the NBA so far this season, with Rudy Gobert reminding everybody why he's won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards. With Rudy Gobert on the floor, the Timberwolves are only allowing 105 points per 100 possessions, and they're holding their opponents to an effective field goal percentage of only 49% when he's on the floor. And if you've watched any Timberwolves game this year, it's pretty easy to see why those defensive numbers are so good. The first thing that you think of when you think of Rudy Gobert is probably his interior defense. That's been his calling card throughout his career so far, but this season it's been a little bit different. Rudy Gobert's activity on the defensive end has involved him having to cover a little bit more ground, and interestingly enough, he's showcased significantly more mobility than he has in the past. During their matchup against OKC during the in-season tournament, we got to see Gobert's defensive impact, and it was clearer than ever. OKC is a team that's pretty hell-bent on driving to the basket as much as they can, so on this possession, 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪 is going to get downhill towards the rim, but Rudy's going to slide over to shut down anything in the paint. Chet's actually going to make a good cut and 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪's going to find him, but Gobert's presence is going to make sure that he doesn't get any ideas, and it leads to the kick out to 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪, and he's going to miss the corner 3. OKC does get the rebound, and they're going to swing the ball around until it gets to Dort, who initially seems like he's open, but then Gobert's going to make the closeout to him on the perimeter and discourage any spot up 3. And when Dort attacks the closeout, Gobert's going to do a really good job of staying on his hip as he drives, making sure that he doesn't feel safe enough to put up a layup. Dort's going to bail out to Aaron Wiggins, but as we've seen, none of OKC's guys really want to try and put up a shot on Gobert in the paint, so he's going to throw it out to Dort in the corner, and it leads to a miss, and Minnesota gets possession. On their next defensive possession, we got one of the best defensive sequences from a player that I've seen so far this season. 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪 is once again going to drive, and you'd think that since Gobert sinks to help stop the drive, Chet would be left with a wide open 3. But like I mentioned earlier, Gobert has been pretty mobile this year, being able to close out and prevent easy spot up opportunities, and he forces Chet to attack the closeout and get into a difficult hook shot, and he's able to force the miss. 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪 is going to be able to get the rebound, and he finds Chet again at the free throw line, but Rudy closes out to make him second guess and attack. But the thing to notice is that Gobert closes out sideways instead of straight on, so he's able to move laterally with Chet as he attacks, and he forces Chet to pick up his dribble and ultimately pass out to 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪. Now he's going to try and get downhill, but he stops his drive as Rudy starts to slide over to contain, and he's going to get the ball back to Chet as the shot clock goes down, and Gobert is going to contest the shot and force the miss. On this possession, Edwards and Cat are defending the pick and roll up top, and pay attention to the fact that Cat is going to defend with the soft hedge, prompting Gobert to move in to cover 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙪 on the roll. Teams will generally try to take advantage of a defender helping off of the strong side corner, which is Gobert in this case, by passing to the corner for a shot. But what that fails to account for is Gobert being able to cover the ground to not only contest, but actually block the shot. Gobert being a little bit more mobile allows them to have him defend at the level of the screen, and that's especially useful against players like Steph Curry, forcing the ball out of his hands so that other less capable creators are forced to try and generate offense. When he's forced to switch onto ball handlers in the pick and roll, it's not a guaranteed blow-by. Gobert still has a wide frame that can clog up space, which can force his matchups into settling for low percentage looks instead of trying to attack the basket against him. I don't think anyone's going to be making the argument that he's the most versatile center in the league, but this season we've definitely seen him operate further away from the paint with a lot more success than in the past. What's interesting is the fact that the NBA actually tracks distance traveled. So I looked at which centers are covering the most ground on the defensive end, and sure enough, Gobert is covering the 3rd most ground of any center in the NBA. Now, just because you're covering a lot of ground doesn't inherently make you a good defender, but the fact that Gobert is covering as much distance as he is and still extremely impactful on the defensive end of the floor really puts into perspective just how much he's doing. Probably the most important aspect of Gobert's overall game is the idea of rim deterrence, something that you've probably heard me touch on before if you're a longtime viewer of the channel. It's this idea that a player is such a dominant defensive presence around the rim that teams will literally avoid taking shots at the rim because of the threat of that player disrupting their shot. It's been the case for a large portion of his career at this point, but Gobert has some of the strongest rim deterrence in the entire league, if not the strongest. This possession shows that. Rudy sliding over from the weak side along the baseline, forces the bailout to the corner, and Hayward actually gets by the closeout to get into space, but he knows that there's not any chance of him getting to the rim with Gobert there, so he has to kick it back out up top. When Miller drives, the shot that he ends up going with is just barely inside the paint and well outside of the restricted area, and Rudy is still there to disrupt things and clean up the possession. We see it again here. Mark Williams gets the pass on the short roll, and he's going to try and use some footwork to get around Rudy, but there's nothing really there, so he ends up sending it back up top. Hayward attacks the closeout off the pass from Washington, but he doesn't even consider trying to get any further into the paint with Rudy there, so he's going to send it back out, and the possession culminates into a missed three. The fact that he's able to stay with guys on their way to the basket when he gets switched onto them makes it difficult for them to get what they're looking for around the rim, and it forces them to attempt shots further away, and they end up having to settle for difficult turnaround jumpers instead of what would have originally been layups directly at the rim. Being able to deter shots at the rim is one thing, but the fact that even when teams do get to the rim against Gobert, he's still an incredible shot blocker and shot contester, so your odds of getting a shot to fall over him at the rim is even lower. A huge part of Minnesota's defensive success so far this season is how effectively they've limited opposing teams inside the arc. This chart shows the best defenses inside the arc, and the Timberwolves are holding opponents to roughly 3.9% and 3.5% below league average at the rim and in the mid-range. This aspect of Rudy's game really elevates the defensive personnel that the Timberwolves have surrounding Gobert. They can run guys off of screens and force them towards Gobert down low or into pull-up mid-range looks. They can make quick rotations knowing that he's down low to clean things up, and it's devastating for offenses to try and score against. It's no surprise that him and Jaden McDaniels are such a dangerous defensive duo. And then you factor in the defensive leap that Anthony Edwards is having, guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker making major contributions on the defensive end, and their defensive success makes a ton of sense. To give you an idea of how little interest teams have in taking shots at the rim because of Gobert, when he's off the floor for Minnesota, opposing teams are taking 33% of their shots at the rim, but when he's back on the floor, opposing teams only take 25% of their shots at the rim. Another interesting thing to note here too is that when Gobert and McDaniels are on the floor together, opposing teams only attempt 23.3% of their shots at the rim. For context, league average shot frequency at the rim is around 33%. That's a massive difference in volume of opponent shots at the rim. But how does this current level of rim deterrence stack up with his previous seasons, particularly the seasons where he's won Defensive Player of the Year? This chart shows how much less opposing teams were shooting at the rim when he's on the floor versus when he's off, as well as the difference in efficiency at the rim. As you can see, this season, opposing teams are shooting 4.5 percentage points worse and 7.3 percentage points less at the rim, meaning he's offering some of the best deterrence and rim protection of his entire career. To me, the thing that's really allowed his defensive ability to shine through so heavily this year is the fact that he has the defensive personnel around him that makes it to where he doesn't have to work as hard. In the past, in Utah, they didn't have the most reliable perimeter defense around him, and he'd end up out of position and forced to carry more of the burden defensively. Now that he's not being forced to be a one-man defense, the results are speaking for themselves. There's still a ton of season left, and it's way too early to crown anybody as Defensive Player of the Year. That being said, just based on the first 20 or so games of the season, I'd argue he has just as good of a case as anybody if the season were to end today. So do you guys think that the Timberwolves defense this year is enough to elevate them into real threats for a title? Be sure to let me know in the comments. If this is your first time visiting the channel, first of all, thank you so much for watching. Second of all, if you like this kind of stuff and you want to see more, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps me out a ton, and that's the easiest way to help me continue to make content. Huge thank you to my patrons for helping support the channel. Thanks to all of you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.